My name is Nancy Eichner, and I'm a member and one of the founding members of the Seacoast Village Project. And it's my pleasure and Carl Singer's to welcome you to the first Lunch and Learn of 2022. This is a series that Carl was really the instigator of last year. And we're so happy to be able to get beyond COVID in our conversations this year. So for those of you who aren't members, Seacoast Village Project is an organization of members who are banding together to improve their odds of being able to stay at home by getting connected and getting smart and helping each other out. And this is one of our community offerings. So one of the education series that we offer outside of our village membership. For a few housekeeping details, as I mentioned before, if you haven't already, if you could put your name and the town you live in the chat, that would be really helpful so that we can see who's here. If you have questions during Carl's presentation, if you could include them in the chat, just type them in. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat as we go. And because we have so many people on the call, we'll be looking at those chat questions first to make sure they get answered at the end, where we've allowed some time for questions and answers. Special thanks this year to a sponsor that we have for our Lunch and Learn series. And we'll tell you a little bit more about Senior Safe at the end of the program, but we're delighted to have a sponsor who can help us with some of the materials we're planning to provide as this series goes on. So now about our speaker. Today's speaker is well known to many of you. It's Carl Singer. He is one of the longest term Seacoast Village Project supporters and members. And he has been a wonderful advisor to us and co-hosting this series since the end of 2020. Dr. Singer, Carl, is a board-certified geriatrician, which is a physician who specializes in caring for older adults. For many of us, unfortunately, this may be as close to a geriatrician as we get. They're a rare bird, but very valuable specialty in medical care. He's the medical director at Rockingham County Nursing Home and Rehabilitation Center. And he has a long-standing interest in how we can maximize good health as we get older. So today he's going to share some information about strategies that he provides to his patients and give us some of the tips that he shares and some of the tips that he uses himself. So without further ado, I'm going to switch to speaker view and turn this over to Dr. Singer.
Hi, everyone. So this is an area that I've been interested in for many, many years. I started practicing in Exeter in 1972. And a couple of years after I arrived here, I happened to run across a quote that really, to me, summarized this whole aspect of the practice. I was interested not just in curing people, but in keeping people healthy. And so I found a quote from a physician who lived from 1135 to 1204. His name was Maimonides. He's also a Jewish religious scholar. And what he said was, live sensibly. Among 1,000 people, only one dies a natural death. The rest succumb to irrational modes of living. And I just love that statement. And I loved it so much that this is my business card. And I put it on the back of my business card. And so anybody who met me for the first time would get a copy of my business card. And they see this also in a bigger form on the wall. Back then I had a beard. That's why it doesn't look exactly like me. And someone I knew who was a great calligrapher did that picture and put it on my card. So I've always been really interested in this. And then I ran the education program at Exeter Hospital and was fortunate over the years to invite a number of people who were able to speak to this issue. So one of them was Dr. George Valiant. And Dr. Valiant is a psychiatrist who ran a study called the Harvard Grant Study. And this was a study of 200 Harvard undergraduates that was started in 1936 and is still ongoing now, mostly now with the children of the people in the study. But Dr. Valiant went to high school at Phillips Exeter. So it was easy to invite him to come up and speak here. And he spoke a couple of times on the study. My nurse practitioner, Annie Madden's dad, was part of the study. And there was also somebody here in Exeter that was part of the study. And so that's a fascinating study. There's a book that tells about some of the men called Triumph of Experience. And again, it's one of the longest running studies of life. This took it up through the men in their 80s and 90s. Secondly, I was invited Dr. Tom Pearls up. He's now at Boston University. And he started a study which was initially the Harvard Centenarian Study and now is the New England Centenarian Study. And he's been looking at people over 100 to try and figure out how they get there, how much is genetic, how much is lifestyle choices. And actually, when he came back to speak a second time, about 15 years after the study started, he said, I'm not studying centenarians anymore. They're too common. We have too many centenarians. I'm studying super centenarians, people who are 105 to 110 years old. So, and I sent you a link to his Living to 100 questionnaire that I hope many of you filled out, and we can talk about some of the things that you learned from that. And then the third person that spoke at Exeter a couple of times was David Sinclair, who's a researcher who's head of the Center for Aging at Harvard Medical School. And he's very interested in a lot of the biology. A few years ago, he was studying resveratrol, which is a substance in red wine that's sort of fallen by the wayside, but he's doing a bunch of other things. And one of the things that he's interested in is fasting. And so I recently read that he just eats one meal a day because he thinks that's one of the things that will really help him live a long and healthy life. And then the fourth person that I've really learned a lot from is a researcher at Einstein Medical School in New York City named Nir Barzilai. And he's doing a study of centenarians also in the New York area. And his subjects are primarily Ashkenazi Jews. And when I wrote to him about what he had done, he said, how would you like to join the study? So I'm actually a study participant in a longevity study. And I've gone down once to New York, and I'll be going down in a couple of weeks for some further testing. So it's fun to not only be interested in this professionally, but also to be part of it. So it's interesting when I look at this, there are two main areas that I think I've really changed my whole focus on. From the moment I started practicing, smoking was one of the things that I spent a lot of time talking about. And I think everyone's aware of the risks of smoking. Surgeon General's report came out in 1952. But the things that I really have found of interest over the last 5 to 10 years are really exercise and diet. And those are areas where I've made major changes. And I've put exercise, of all the lifestyle things that you can do, up now at number one. I used to put cigarette smoking one, but I've really moved exercise to number one. And there are lots of reasons that exercise is helpful. It changes how your body uses energy, so it takes energy from fat storage. It allocates energy to repair and maintenance. So, for example, it helps to repair muscle tears, repair cartilage, and repair microfractures. And so we can actually call exercise build back better. Not the Biden build back better, but the body build back better. Exercise also releases antioxidants, which helps to deal with some of the things that are stresses, and also anti-inflammatories, which tamp down inflammation. And there's a really interesting study that just came out in the last couple of weeks, and it looks at a specific compound called irisin. And irisin is part of a substance that the body makes that breaks off and can pass into the brain, and it will increase brain function. It will stimulate the growth of new neurons, and it will decrease inflammation. So they're actually looking at developing this as a medication in some way, shape, or form. But this is very new, as I say. I just read about this probably within the last month. So how much exercise do we need? Probably 10 to 20 minutes is a minimum, is helpful. And the goal, we used to say 10,000 steps. It may be 5,000 or 7,000 steps as one measure. But it's really, there are so many benefits to exercise. So where did exercise fit in my life? Well, when I first came to Exeter, I used to bike to work, but then 108 and 150 got too dangerous. The cars just started driving faster and faster, and there are no bike lanes, so I gave it up. And so for a number of years, I didn't exercise at all. And then one day I was walking by my exercycle, which had turned into a coat rack. And I said, this is stupid. I have a wonderful place to exercise that's very safe. Now I've just got to figure out how to make it so that I enjoy it. And what I discovered for me worked was to was to take courses or to look at short videos. And so that's what I've done over the last 20 years or so. I've turned exercise into a time when I can learn. And so I take courses. I started by using the great courses. Now I just take courses on the web. There's so many that are free through all the Harvard and Stanford and Coursera and so on, Udacity. And you can take courses on anything you want. And it turns out most of the lectures are about 30 minutes. So it works out perfectly. And what I do is I try and bike up and down hills for 25 minutes. And then I use weights or stretchy bands. And I shoot for 7 days a week. And I'm really happy if I do 5 days a week. So again, you can't beat yourself up because you don't quite meet your goal. You've got to say, I do the best I can. I set a target. I see how close I can get to the target. So I'm really happy if I do 5 days a week of 30 minutes of exercise. And then I also, go up and down the stairs at my house and walk outside to get the mail, which is a very long driveway and so on. So exercise to me is now really the number one thing that I recommend to people as something to do. And again, I don't view it as exercise. I view it as a chance for me to learn. And it's wonderful because I can just focus on whatever course it is that I'm learning and not even think about the fact that riding an exercycle is pretty boring. But, there are all sorts of other things. My wife has a wonderful Zumba teacher, and she does that 5 days a week, and she does some strength training at the Y also. But it can be, golf for Dick Sainer. It can be whatever you like. But the thing that's important is to commit to it. And for me, I actually think it was life-saving because in 2005, I had an episode where I ended up needing a stent, and my artery, one of my main arteries was 99% blocked, but I never had a heart attack. I never had chest pain. And I think that's because at that point I was exercising vigorously and I had so many extra blood vessels that even with that blockage of one of the main arteries, I never had any symptoms at all. So I attribute the last 17 years of my life to my commitment to exercise. So I think that's really a very important thing to do. And then the other fascinating thing that I think has really changed is our notion about diet. And for me, my diet has changed a great deal. And so there's lots of information on diet, and the basic diets, the two basic diets, which are very similar, are the DASH diet, which is the diet against systolic hypertension, and the Mediterranean diet. And for example, for brain health, avoid added sugar, fried foods, high carb foods, alcohol, and preserved meats with nitrates. And instead, switch to fruits and veggies, whole grain, fish and seafood, some chicken, nuts and legumes, low-fat dairy, and limit sodium. And one thing that I saw recently was a study on olive oil, which quantified how much olive oil you should be taking. And it turns out that you should try and eat about 2 teaspoons of extra virgin olive oil a day. And this was just a very recent article that talked about the benefits of adding olive oil to your diet. And so that's one thing that I'm going to start to. I've used some olive oil, but I've used some butter too. And so I've decided one of the things that I'm going to switch as of a couple of weeks ago is to switch to more olive oil and try and eliminate butter. So, so if you look up DASH or Mediterranean diet, you'll see the particular elements. Now, what did I do? So probably over the years between, let's say, 1990 and 2000, I did a few things like I wasn't exercising back then. I would snack before I went to bed. I'd have chips. I like cookies. And I saw all of a sudden my weight was up around 20 pounds. And I said, I need to take this under control, but I don't want to go on a diet. I just want to make some small changes to what I'm doing and see if I can get back to what I weighed in high school. And so the changes I made were, for the easiest one, I loved apple cider. There was a stand in Exeter where you could get fresh pressed apple cider. But I realized that was just like drinking sugar water. So I said, okay, the simplest thing I can do is to just switch to no calorie beverages. So I switched to green tea, 2 cups a day, and 3 to 4 glasses of water a day. And that cut out a lot of calories. And then I started limiting desserts and I stopped snacking. And I just decreased amounts, so no seconds, and just started to shrink the size of servings. And of course, that's about when I started exercising too. And then over the last 10 to 15 years, as I've read more about the Mediterranean and DASH diets, I've really changed sort of the content of my diet. Besides smaller servings, I've tried to add 5 or 6 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And we're so lucky that we can go into or have delivered to us fresh fruits and vegetables. So I usually try and have 2 servings of fruit a day and 3 veggies a day. I also started eating nuts because I think nuts are another one of those things. So I have like 6 bags of different kinds of nuts, and I'll have a small serving of nuts for lunch. And then for dinner, with the fruit I have, I'll just sprinkle some sliced almonds on them. For drinks, as I said, I have usually 2 cups of green tea with nothing in it, 3 to 4 glasses of water. And I do drink a small glass of orange juice with calcium in it because I don't drink milk because I'm somewhat lactose intolerant. And I try and limit desserts and carbs. And particularly over the pandemic, my consumption of red meat has gone almost to 0. We have now a lot of veggie meals, some chicken, 1 or 2 servings of fish a week. And as I say, the latest thing is going from a little bit of olive oil to try and using olive oil instead of butter on everything that I use butter on. So diet has changed a lot for me over the last 20 years. And again, I didn't really think of it as diet. I thought of, I'm going to make one change and then I'll build on that and I'll do another and another and another. Cigarette smoking, again, I can't think of a single good thing about cigarette smoking. It's not easy if you're addicted. There are lots of ways, and you can speak to your doctor, and there are over-the-counter methods if you do. One area that's interesting is alcohol. Certainly in this Grant study, the Harvard Men study, alcohol turned out to be one of the biggest destroyers of people's life and health. We have sort of limits that people have talked about, 2 for men a day and 1 for women, but there is some interesting evidence that not drinking alcohol at all might be somewhat better. So you might think about that, or at least try and get your amount of alcohol as low as you can. For supplements, as I say, I don't drink milk, and so I take calcium and vitamin D as a supplement. And that's the only supplement that I take. But I'll be really interested to hear what other people do and what their choices are. And then there are 2 areas that I think are fascinating and we'll learn a lot more about over the next 5 to 10 years. One is the microbiome, and that's all the bacteria that live in your body, not just your gut, but for example, the dentist who works with me at the nursing home sent me a fascinating article about periodontal disease, the microbiome that lives in your mouth. And there's some interesting research now about how that can trigger inflammation and how there's a drug company that's developing a new drug to block the signals that are sent out by the bacteria that live in your mouth that trigger inflammation. And there's some evidence that it might decrease your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease by blocking some of the bad things that the microbiome does. So it's hard to know exactly how to shift it. There's probably some shift by cutting back on sugars and high carbs and switching to the Mediterranean and DASH diet, but we still haven't really figured out how to modify the microbiome. But I think if you watch the news, we're going to see more and more about the microbiome, the role it plays in disease. For example, I was reading a book by one of the people that was a resident with me in Boston. He's a professor of neurology at the Brigham, Howard Weiner, and his special interest is multiple sclerosis. But he was talking about how they're doing a lot of research on how the microbiome may trigger a number of diseases, brain diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or Lou Gehrig disease. And the other thing that we're going to see a lot more about is inflammation. And it's very clear, for example, we've known for 10 or 15 years that inflammation plays a big role in blood vessel disease, whether that's stroke or heart disease. And again, how much of this is triggered by the microbiome? How much of it is triggered by your diet? We don't know. And how do we turn this off? Again, these are things that I think we're just starting to learn. But I was fascinated by that article that I got just last week from Dr. Pranich about periodontal disease and the trigger there and being able to go against it. So what I'd like to do now is to hear some strategies that other people have developed. We do know that adopting these healthy lifestyle things, if you're 50, is likely to add 8 to 11 years to your life. So a 50-year-old who follows these kinds of things will live till their 80s. And we know that even beyond that, if you're in your 80s, these will help to add years to your life. So it's important, even at this stage, for example, with cigarette smoking, if you are a smoker, whatever age you stop at, it will be beneficial. Likewise, changing your diet and starting exercise at whatever age you are, if you make these changes, it will make a difference. I'd also be interested in if anybody did the Live to 100 calculator and what they found. What did they learn? Where were the areas where they might be able to change what they're doing, and add years to their life. So I'm going to stop here because I'd like this to be a cooperative discussion with everybody talking about what they do and or if they have any questions about some of the things that I've said.
Thank you so much, Carl. So what I'm going to do is invite people, if you have a question or a comment, to unmute yourself. And I'm going to switch to gallery view so I can see you. But speak up, Nancy Reese. I see your hand.
I wanted to say that probably 20 years ago now, I read Benjamin Wheel's book about supplements, and I take about 18 different kinds of supplements: calcium, enzymes, chromium piconolate, selenium, multivitamin, all you can name. And that kind of gives me a pass, I think, to eat moderately. I eat off small plates, but I do eat chocolate. I don't eat a lot of sweets. Yeah, I just dark chocolate. I don't eat a lot of sweets, but I do eat some once in a while. I eat a small amount of chips or salty things at lunch, and I do eat some processed meat. But I only have open-faced sandwiches, and I don't eat white bread. I only eat grain bread, and I think I'm moderately healthy. My only problems have been spinal stenosis, and I've instituted a walking program and did indeed improve my bone density. So, but I'm not willing to go to a vegetarian diet. I mean, vegetables are okay for a side dish, but not a main dish usually, unless it's like eggplant parmesan or something interesting. I think that I will be long-lived genetically from my family. The people who died in my family had emphysema from smoking or alcoholism or things that, don't impact me. Oh, and I do drink 1 glass of wine usually, or one beer every day. So, but I did make a New Year's resolution to walk at least a half an hour or 45 minutes with the dog. And I have kept that so far, despite the awful weather we have had. And I do yoga or strength training by Zoom.
I think that sounds like a great program. Again, with supplements, the challenge is to try and show that they're beneficial. For most of them, we don't have great evidence because since they're not patented, the drug companies don't want to study them. So we don't have good evidence. The main thing I want to do is to make sure that they're safe so that they come from reliable suppliers. Mm-hmm. And that they're not things that are potentially toxic. So I think, most of those things, again, a lot of what you could also get by eating fruits and vegetables. But I certainly don't disagree with people trying them as long as they're part of their whole program. And I think it sounds like you have a great program. And again, you sort of said, I'm going to make a change in direction. And
I do eat more nuts, and I have neuropathy now. So even though my vitamin B was tested, I take extra, above and beyond. So
good, great.
So Carl, I tried that link that you sent to find out how long I would live, and I think you and I talked about it. They told me that 94 was likely to me, and they told me 27 more years, which I thought was interesting. But really, when you start thinking about how to keep your body so that it's in really good shape for most of those years, and you compress the years that you have disability, that seems to be the goal of what you're talking about, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Jim Fries, who just passed away, was a rheumatologist who wrote about the compression of morbidity. And what you want to do is to basically have one day at the end of life where you're disabled, and then it's over. And so that's really the goal, is what you can do to make that period of disability much less. And that's where exercise plays such an important role in terms of decreasing the time when you're limited. So again, that's why it's on the top of my list. Did anybody else do the questionnaire? If not, it's available. The link was in the announcement, and just go to Tom Pearl's, P-E-R-L-S, Live to 100 calculator. It's a nice way to sort of look at what are the things that we know that are going to play a role in living a long and healthy life. And you can add it to that.
Dick Sweat, did you have a question? Can you unmute yourself? You got unmute. Yep, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, my question is, in the recent Exeter newsletter, there was an article about a new store that opened downtown called Hemp Connection. And a lot of people at Planet Fitness use this CBD to cure a lot of their ills. What's your opinion of this?
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion because I haven't seen a lot of good evidence for benefits. There's one person I know at the nursing home who's using it, who thinks it helps with controlling pain, but I have not seen, the reading that I've done hasn't shown it strong. It doesn't appear to be too harmful. One of the things I do get concerned about is people driving. We've certainly seen more in states that have legalized marijuana, people driving while intoxicated with marijuana, more young people than older people. So I don't have a strong feeling on it. I just haven't seen enough evidence to make me feel strongly one way or another about it.
Carl, in the chat, we have two questions. One is about the role of vitamin D supplements, and the other is about talking a little bit more about intermittent fasting.
Right. So vitamin D, here in the north, because we tend not to go out with bare skin, we may be somewhat deficient. There's no evidence that measuring your vitamin D is helpful, very helpful, because the assays are not great. So what I do is I take 800 international units of vitamin D with my calcium supplement. So other people at the nursing home will often give it as a large dose once a month. So like 2,000 units, or not 2,000, sorry, 10,000 units once a month. So I think probably most people would benefit from a small supplement of vitamin D, particularly because we're not outside in the sun for so much. And the second question was
about fasting.
Fasting. Yeah, as I said, David Sinclair, who's head of the aging research group at Harvard Medical School, eats one meal a day. Again, it's been hard to pin this down. We know it works in mice to lengthen life. It's been much harder to do in humans. So I'd say it's one of those areas where you can try it if you think it's helpful. I don't think it's harmful to fast, either by only eating 2 meals a day, or by going one day without fasting, one day without eating. Again, there are lots of different variants, and I think it's been hard to find in humans to do the studies long enough to really show that it makes a big difference. But certainly in animal studies, intermittent fasting appears to be helpful. The other thing that again, I'm not going to recommend for anybody here that may play a role, Dr. Barzilai, who's running the study that I'm in for longevity, that takes a medication called metformin, which is a common medicine that people with diabetes take. It's the first drug that most people take. And there's some evidence, but again, not enough to have it as an indication that this may help change cellular metabolism in a way that prolongs cell life. And So he's done this on an individual basis, recognizing that it's not standard use of the medication. So it's interesting to me that both Dr. Sinclair and Dr. Barzilai, who are longevity researchers, have adopted these choices. So that's why I'm somewhat open to people making decisions as long as they're not harmful, because we don't know all the answers, and there hasn't been a lot of research until the last 10 or 15 years.
There are a couple of questions, Carl, about probiotics. We see those advertisements on TV all the time.
Right.
What do you think?
So again, they're probably not harmful if you have a normal immune system. We do know that some people, if they have a weakened immune system, can rarely get infections from them. And we know that changing the bacteria in the gut can even be therapeutic, because we know that if people get an infection by a bacteria called C. difficile, which you can get after you've been on heavy doses of antibiotics, if antibiotics don't cure that, you actually do transplants of stool samples to repopulate your gut. So we know that there are ways in which we can do it, but we don't have easy ways to do it. And it's another one of those areas where I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have a much better idea. They don't appear to be harmful. They may be helpful. I leave it up to people to whether they want to try probiotics in time as a regular thing. But I just don't. I haven't seen enough evidence to say this one or that one is better. And I think it's because the microbiome is so complex that it's really, really hard to study. But I think this is a huge area of interest. And I know, like when Dr. Weiner was talking about the research that they're doing at the Brigham, research on inflammation and the microbiome are two very big areas that they have large groups of researchers working on.
So what would you say about stress, Carl? Stress and life and aging?
Yeah, so stress, again, I think is definitely, I know in my life, the two major illnesses I've had were both work stress related problems. They both occurred right at times of very high stress. And so whatever you can do, and this is where things like yoga, meditation, even exercise are all very good ways to deal with stress. And so I think those are things that I very highly recommend for people to be involved in as ways to help to deal with stress without using medication.
Let's look and see. I'm scrolling through. Other questions or thoughts?
So substitute for olive oil, canola oil, or other vegetable oils. So canola oil is another one that you can try. And
walnut oil is really good too, because it has nut.
What? Say that again?
Walnut oil.
Walnut oil. Okay.
Walnut is better than canola.
Okay. This is why I want to bring everyone in, because all of you have been trying these things, and I really want to learn from you too about some of the choices that you've made and things that
I would add quickly that I bought CBD oil at the AIM clinic, and I took the bottle downtown to the hemp store, and they gave me a bottle, but the bottle they gave me I bought downtown, although it was similar, had THC in it. So I walked outside, and my friend said to me, "You're high, aren't you?" And I knew not to go riding in a car. But I will say CBD oil is useful for me because I have insomnia. So it has a relaxing component. But I would buy it. I wouldn't buy it at the hemp store. I would buy it at the AIM clinic. Just pure, no THC in it. So
Carl, I know one question that has to do with sort of modifying stressors and difficulties in our environment is, do you stay where you're living now? Do you do a lateral move? Do you move to a structured community like Riverwoods? Do you try to address some of the structural things that make it hard to avoid injury? What are your thoughts about aging in place and living at home? You and I have talked about this a lot.
Right. So this is a complex thing. And I think, hopefully we'll do a whole program on this about what are the alternatives and how do you decide and so on. And it's partly why I joined and support the Village Project, because at the moment I'm still working. And so it would be hard for me to continue working if I didn't live in this community. But none of my children live around here. They all live somewhere between an hour and a long flight away. And so what I'm interested in is both retrofitting my house and having a support system like the Village Project, which I think is great. And there are two other things that are really important to health. So one is socialization. So social isolation and loneliness are very bad for your health. And so the Village Project for me is one of the ways to develop a community where you have activities that you can share with other people. And the other thing that you really need to pay attention to is vision and hearing. Because the other thing that really isolates you is not being able to see and not being able to hear. So, using hearing protection when you run your vacuum cleaner, making sure that you don't have wax in your ears, using a hearing aid if it's felt that that's going to be helpful for you, and getting your eyes checked regularly and getting, any procedures done. So for example, when I had cataracts, once it made a huge difference once I had cataract surgery and was able to see clearly again. Because there were just things that were getting hard for me to do, like reading music. So those are both things. But I think as we, as the whole raison d'etre for the Village, where you live turns out to be one of the major things. And so trying to make that decision, which, I struggle with and which we discuss with my kids every time we get together, is a major thing that we think about. So what the Village Project to me is a great way to help to mitigate that risk factor and that stress for a period of some time. And I'd be interested in other people's observations about this too.
One thing, I'm really glad that you mentioned vision and hearing, Carl, because I think that one thing that really leads to isolation, and it also seems to take your cognitive edge off a little bit, is the poor vision and hearing, because you're just not getting all the information in that you need to. So I would second and third the vision and hearing, staying on top of. That's such an important thing. Dick Sweat.
Yeah, Rockingham County in their planning department has initiated a study called Age-Friendly Communities. It hasn't really gotten off the ground at all yet, but do you know anything about what our goals are? I mean, is it more to provide amenities such as meals on wheels, walking paths, things like that? Or is it going to really provide some programs such as that you're talking about?
I'm not familiar with it at all.
Really?
Yeah. They haven't asked me to contribute. So, but next time I'm out at the nursing home, I'll ask our administrator if there's.
Well, it's sponsored by the Rockingham planning community.
Right.
Okay.
If you give me Nancy can send me your email address and I'll send you the name of the coordinator.
Sure.
So
Right.
Dick, there's an age-friendly community initiative that the AARP Foundation has funded. And when I called to find out if we could be part of it, they said that it has to go through your county planning commission. So I'm wondering if that's what they're talking about.
Well,
I know here in Portsmouth, the woman who's the director of the senior center is the named lead on that effort, but I haven't seen a lot happening. I don't know if it's because of COVID or what.
I know it's going through the towns because I applied to be on the what do they call it? Some type of a committee, and I haven't heard anything, but I was just kind of curious. I mean, this is age-friendly communities. I mean, our demographics were getting older, and I thought it was a good concept, but I was kind of curious, really, if they were going to be talking about being able to initiate the things that you're talking about that extend your life, or just providing amenities that make it easier for you before you go into Riverwoods.
So I think that we'd have to get the planning commission to tell us. What I've seen in other areas where they've had age-friendly communities, I think they've one in Goffstown, is that they really are talking about accessibility. So they're talking about sidewalks and ramps and more infrastructure. But I could be wrong. I think that's a good point of something that we could explore.
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right. I don't think you're wrong on that. And I really think the items that we're discussing here are much more important than additional sidewalks and walking trails in Stratton Hill Park and things like that. Anyway, that's it.
But I think your point is that we need to, particularly in a state like New Hampshire, which has an older population, we need to start thinking in a more global way about what we can do to improve the quality of life of our older citizens, using all the resources that we have. It's great that we have the Village Project, but they can't do it alone. So we need to look at other things too. Somebody made a comment here about Fitbits. And again, since my bike has a timer on it, I don't, and it does how many calories I burned and stuff like that. I don't use that, but for some people, I think that works out really well. Again, whatever floats your boat is what counts. I never said to my patients, choose this or choose that. Do what you enjoy and find a way that it becomes fun, and that you look, I look forward to exercising every day. I think, what can I learn today? What am I going to find out about that I don't know anything about? And partly it helps me because one of the other activities I'm involved in is I do a math enrichment class for fifth graders at my local elementary school. So I'm always looking for new material to teach to them. And so taking these courses is a great way for me to get more information to bring to my fifth graders. So I look forward to it every day when I work.
And I think one of the comments in there, a dog is a very good accountability partner for walking. You definitely can't argue with a dog who knows when that magic time is. So other thoughts or questions? Bert, unmute yourself.
Hi, Carl. I apologize. I got on 17 minutes late, so I don't know if you covered this, but did you talk about how a plant-based diet is really a important aspect of getting to a climate-safe planet?
No.
Mentioned that aspect of it, but I think that's another benefit besides the personal benefit. It certainly makes sense to switch to a more plant-based diet. And I know that there's a group of physicians here in the state that's working on aspects of climate change. We have a meeting tomorrow night, a Zoom meeting with Dr. Tom Sherman, who's the state senator from Portsmouth, and Dr. Howard Dean, talking about some of the climate aspects of health. And so I'm sure that switching to a plant-based diet is another thing that, is a bigger benefit than just the individual benefit of switching to a largely or completely plant-based diet. No, I totally agree that that's a nice benefit.
Any other questions, thoughts? So
Yeah.
what I would like to do is, first of all, thank Carl, and everybody give a round of applause. A wealth of knowledge and a very generous village member. So thank you for your preparation and for sharing with us today. I think that was wonderful. What I'd like to do now is just share my screen and share the information on our sponsor, who I talked to a little bit about before. So let me just see, select a window, share. So I mentioned before that Chris Wrench and Senior Safe Advisors, or Senior Safe Aging, are the sponsors for this Lunch and Learn series this year. I've worked with Chris on a number of projects, both in my own home and with a couple of clients. And he has a very unique combination of skills. He's both an occupational therapist, and those are the people who often come into our house to talk to us about accessibility, mobility solutions in bathrooms and things like that. But he also comes from a family of builders, and he's a contractor. So he's not only able to make recommendations for some things that might help you out at home and help you stay safer, but he can actually install them. And so I think he's a great resource for us to know in our village. He's going to be making a presentation for us in April on improving home safety through some of the modifications that he talks about. The second thing is that I am going to put a link in the chat to a quick link in the chat to a little short 3-question survey we have. So we'd like to know what you thought of the presentation today, what your takeaway points would be, and also we'd like to know about your ideas and your thoughts for additional sessions that we might have. We have our series sketched out for the year, but we have a lot of opportunities in the village to learn a lot of things. And your input will really, really help us there. So, Carl, any final thoughts before we leave?
No, I appreciate everyone's feedback here. And, I think this is a shared journey that we're all on. And so I'm interested in learning from all of you. And I'm really so thankful that the Village Project has gotten started. And I think it's a great way to help all of us in the Seacoast area to have healthier and happier lives as we continue on this journey. So I look forward to our next presentation a month from now.
Thanks, Carl. So next month, the third Tuesday of the month at noon, Carl and I will be back. And next month, we're going to talk about advocating for yourself effectively in a very stressed out healthcare system. And we'll have some tips on how to do that. But until then, hope you stay safe and warm, and we will see you soon.